today I'm speaking to a fantastic guest who's come in today to talk to us about a few issues that are going around not only the Northern Territory and Aboriginal communities, but Australia in general. He is the Deputy Chairman of the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, Deputy Chairman Peter Kell. How are you today, Peter?
Very well, it's great to be here.
Excellent. So can you please tell me about your position at Asic?
Okay, Asic, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, is the government regulator that protects you from bad conduct or rip-offs in the finance sector. So if your bank or your insurance company or people that are lending you money do the wrong thing, then Asic has the job of stepping in to make sure that that can be fixed up. So broadly speaking, we ensure that companies that operate in the area of money do the right thing by you as the consumer, and also that the stock exchange operates properly. So it's a pretty broad area of responsibility, and I'd like to say we try and get out to as many places in Australia as we can.
And what exactly is your position there?
Okay, I'm the Deputy Chairman, so there are 5 commissioners at Asic, and we have representation right around the country, and it's great to be in Darwin up here visiting our Darwin office. And in that area, or in Asic, I have particular responsibility for the credit side of things, for insurance companies, and for financial advisors. And I think in all of those areas you can have impacts on Indigenous communities. Look, I think it's important for all areas of Australia, including the Northern Territory, because in one way or another, we're all impacted by financial institutions, whether it's your bank or your credit union, or the fact that you might have to have an insurance policy for your car or your house. All these things can impact on you, no matter where you live. And it's therefore very important that you know your rights and you know you've got someone to protect you, and there's somewhere to go if you need information about how these things work and how you can make a better decision, or if something goes wrong, where to go to make a complaint. We have some very large financial institutions in Australia, the 4 big banks, which I think most people have heard of, Westpac and Commonwealth and ANZ and NAB, but there are lots and lots of smaller institutions as well. There are credit unions, some that I know operate up here in the Northern Territory. There are insurance companies. So at the end of the day, there are thousands, literally. So we want to make sure that those that are doing the right thing by their customers can thrive and be successful, and that those doing the wrong thing, well, we can take law enforcement action against them. Okay, so I think what you're referring to there is sometimes it's very easy to get a loan, for example, and in some cases, as we know, it's a bit too easy. You end up with a loan that you can't afford. And that's an area that Asic has just started regulating in the last few years. There was some law reform. It's now been moved to Asic's area of responsibility. So we now license all those people. We keep a track of what they're doing right around Australia, and that goes from the biggest players down to the smallest players. And one of the new laws that's come in is called the responsible lending laws. So it's now against the law to lend to people if they can't afford the loan. That sounds obvious in some ways, but I'm afraid we've seen far too many cases where people have been lent money and they've then suffered significant hardship because they had problems paying it back. That's the sort of thing we want to avoid. Wow. Well, in different areas over the last few years, we've had thousands of people. Let me give you one example up here in the Northern Territory, Amazing Rentals, which had an office here in Darwin. We took action against them because we found they were offering consumer leases circumstances that were damaging consumers. From 2011 up until early this year, we think there were well over 1,500 customers affected. That's just one place. So that's the sort of thing that we want to crack down on. In some of our bigger cases, we've had many thousands of people impacted, and there's a lot of money at stake. We want to make sure it doesn't end up in the hands of the wrong people. Okay, good question. They were operating what are called a consumer lease business, and this is an area that we're focusing on right around Australia. We've seen some problems in Indigenous communities right around Australia with consumer lease businesses. So Amazing Rentals were providing people with products such as fridges, washing machines or electronic goods on a rental arrangement. The problem was they weren't explaining to people what was involved. So we think many people didn't understand that ultimately they were renting these products rather than buying them. That even if they paid off quite a lot of money in rent over a long period of time, they still didn't own the products. Furthermore, they weren't explaining the costs of the rental agreements, and they weren't taking into account the circumstances of the consumers, whether they could actually even afford the rental contract. And that's not good enough, because it should have been obvious in many cases that some of these people, some of the consumers, just couldn't afford what was on offer. Yes, that's part of the arrangement. People who have been paying off these rental contracts on their goods, as I said, it might be a washing machine, it might be an iPad, something like that. They'll be able now, having paid off some rent on that over a period of time, to keep that. Then we've found some people in a few contracts who had paid actually far more than the market value of the product. They're going to get a refund, and we've also shut down Amazing Rentals for at least 12 months, so as a penalty for that firm. But what we'd say to people who are thinking about buying something that's a bit expensive that you can't afford up front, like a washing machine or a fridge, look very carefully and maybe even get some advice before entering into a contract. You don't want to end up paying far more than you have to. Oh, there's no doubt that Aboriginal communities were a very large part of their target audience, both here in Darwin, or particularly in Darwin. They also had stores in Caboolture and Toowoomba, but here in Darwin, members of Aboriginal communities, in particular those receiving some sort of government benefit. And in many cases we found that Amazing Rentals should have known, it should have been obvious to them that the members of these consumers were not necessarily in a position to afford some of the rental contracts that were being offered to them. So that's a real problem. There's no excuse for that sort of conduct anymore. Well, one of the key questions that anyone should ask when they're being offered a deal like this, or thinking about purchasing a fridge or an iPad or something like that, is this contract going to mean that I pay off a set amount and then I own it? Or is it some sort of just renting it and I won't end up owning it? Because that wasn't clear. And I think many of the consumers were quite surprised to find that even if they'd paid a lot of money, they still didn't own the product. So that basic question is a good starting point. Am I going to end up owning this product or not?
So something as simple and clear as that should be a huge indicator.
Yeah, and we've had this problem, I have to say, not just in Darwin, but in a range of other remote locations, including in South Australia, in Queensland, in Victoria, with rental companies targeting in Indigenous communities and just not explaining to people how much they were going to pay and the fact that they still wouldn't end up owning the product. And we've tried to ensure that in all of these cases, the people can get the product at the end of the day. They can keep it. After all, in many cases, they've paid a lot of money. Okay, well, one of the, I think, really good sources of information we have is our MoneySmart website, moneysmart.gov.au. Hopefully you'll remember that. Be smart about your money, MoneySmart, and it has some information about these sorts of issues. It has some information that's specifically there for Indigenous consumers, but also about these sorts of rental issues, whether renting or buying is the better deal, the better option for you. Helps you make those decisions. Again, you can go to Asic's website, which is asic.gov.au. You can easily also go to one of the legal centres up here in Darwin, for example. That's how we found out about this one, about Amazing Rentals. We had some contact from the Aboriginal legal centres up here, which is great to hear from them if they've got some problems, if they've seen some consumer issues, and we like to work with them. And in this case, we've also been able to arrange to give them a bit of money to help educate consumers themselves. They're the ones that are actually better equipped to do it in many cases than we are.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Peter.
No worries. Great to be here.
Thank you very much.